Hi, we're back with MuscleMentor.net. I'm Justin Harris, and this is Brad Hall, and we're taking questions from the internet. This is from Instagram. They want to know the eccentric or concentric rep range, and which one yields more gains. Also, what's in eggs? I'll start with eccentric versus concentric. Uh, Really, if you look at, it's funny because this stuff used to get talked about as gospel in the magazines years ago, even though there was no scientific data to back it up. For a long time, all it would take is some Flex magazine writer to say that the eccentric portion of the movement was the most important, and then everyone would pass that on. And then you go to the gym, and everyone would be like, "Oh, you gotta focus on the eccentric. That's where all the muscle growth comes from." No one really knew why, and there was no scientific study to back it up. It's just some guy in Flex magazine said that. Well, now that the magazines aren't there, we're kind of, luckily, it's a good thing because we're starting to get to be forced to actually validate our opinions. And what's interesting is you go to YouTube right now or any internet site where there's people working out, and go to any large bodybuilder's video, and you'll see him lifting, and you'll see him lifting a certain way. And then you'll see every comment, and every comment will be ripping on his form and saying how terrible his form is. Now, go to any guy training with good form, and you'll see a really skinny, unmuscular guy doing very slow eccentrics, very slow concentrics, and everyone will talk about how good his form is. And so, I have to look back and observe this, and I say, okay, if every really huge dude is training this way, and every really small dude is training this way, can we really still call this way the good form? And I always thought, no, that's ridiculous. It seems like all the big guys are training a certain way, and that certain way is kind of quick, explosive reps, especially on the concentric portion. And a lot of recent EMG studies are showing that the highest rate of mTOR levels, stimulus and muscle protein synthesis, and eventual muscle growth comes from explosive concentric movements. And also it seems like the eccentric portion has far less to do with actual stimulus and protein synthesis than people thought. It's probably more important for muscle soreness, but there's always debate, and there's no real hard one-to-one correlation evidence that shows that muscle soreness has anything to do with muscle growth. I know the long-term kind of dogma was that you get sore because the muscle gets torn apart and it builds back bigger and stronger to not get torn under the same stress. But that makes perfect sense, but there really isn't a lot of data to show that it's muscle protein synthesis that builds the muscle back bigger and stronger, torn or not torn. It's the stimulus of the muscle protein synthesis that causes the repair. And so you can have a highly DOMS muscle, a highly sore muscle, and no stimulus of muscle protein, and you're not going to get that stimulus to add new muscle tissue to build it back. You're going to repair those damaged structures. And Brad might have different opinions on this, but mine aren't opinions, mine come from studies. They show that, the way to lift is, you don't want to get injured, because for long-term growth, you need to stay as injury-free as possible. But it looks like the way the pros are training, which is, you look at Phil Heath, Ronnie Coleman, any of those guys, they're training pretty quick, constant tension, explosive concentric movements, and then and a controlled eccentric portion to prevent injury, to save from injury.
Well, I agree with you, but here's the thing. All the top guys who are big, I wouldn't let any one of them train me. And here's the reason why. They're fucking genetic freaks. Anything they do, one, they won't ever get overtrained. Two, they'll never get injured. And three, they were fucking meant to be huge. So whatever, they could train like a goddamn monkey, and they would still be the size that they are. Now, I still agree with what you're saying, though, that explosive, because it doesn't matter. So if the eccentric is 40 times more anabolic or whatever, then it's still, you want to be able to concentrically press something up to be able to stimulate that. So the eccentric doesn't matter if your concentric sucks. If you can only bench press 135 pounds, then who gives a shit about, slowing down your eccentric with 135 pounds? It defeats the whole purpose. You're going to have to do both, unless you're just doing, somehow you have a machine where you can only do negatives, which I don't, even then I wouldn't do that. So on the eccentric portion of a movement, you're going to be stronger. You're stronger resisting force than you are driving the force. So no matter what, you're going to be stronger during that portion. So I say, why not slow it down? But by slow it down, all I mean is basically, like you said, controlling it, right? You want to explode into that concentric portion of the movement because one, you're weaker. So that's, if you train to become stronger concentrically in your pressing or driving force, then you can create more of a stimulus on that eccentric portion. So they go hand in hand. And I would say most injuries happen when people drop weights or don't control that eccentric. So I don't know how there's a way to disagree because we're saying the same thing. I don't know.
Well, I was kind of hoping Dorian Yates would come up with this because I've had talks with this about other people, and whenever I say, look at every big guy trains one way and every little guy, and I still will challenge anyone to show me a guy who does a 4-second negative, 2-second positive consistently for who's big. Genetics or non-genetics, you won't find someone doing that. But people always bring up Dorian Yates in this form thing. And I'm not saying use bad form, I'm saying lift a certain way. And so anybody who thinks Dorian Yates is lifting differently than you see someone like Ronnie Coleman or something like that, go watch Blood and Guts and count how many seconds it takes for him to do the concentric portion. Every rep is less than 1 second.
The concentric,
yeah. And he just goes slower on the eccentric, and it's controlled. And I'm saying I don't think the eccentric has whatever it takes to control it. Some people with really high levels of fast twitch muscle fibers, you take someone like Ronnie Coleman. This might be bad example because he's so injured. Maybe Phil Heath is a better example. But they're able to move pretty quickly through the eccentric portion and still maintain control with it. But yeah, I was hoping Dorian Yates would come up. It didn't, but because that cracks me up because I hear all the time about, you get this talk and you see it on the internet, people talking about lifting fast, lifting sloppy. That's the way pros lift. No, look at Dorian Yates. Go watch Dorian Yates do his bent over rows with 405. It's slow down, wham, up. Slow down, wham, up.
Yeah, and that's what we mean. That concentric needs to be explosive, and then yeah.
And and you can look at it from a workload perspective. You're trying to generate power, and power is force times velocity. Well, what's force? Force is mass times acceleration, and so in the term of weight, force is mass times gravity. So that's the weight you're lifting. You don't have control over that. So the only way you can generate more power with a given weight is to move that weight quicker. Yeah. Yep. And that's what's going to increase workload and increase and stimulate muscle protein synthesis, which is the whole point. This whole tear the muscle down thing still gets talked about all the time. Tearing the muscle down is a byproduct, but it isn't a necessary byproduct. We want to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. It's probably almost better if there was no muscle damage, then any stimulus of muscle protein synthesis would be creating new muscle right on top from baseline, not having to repair that damage first and then go above baseline. So you're going to get sore from training, but they're really kind of unrelated. What you're trying to do is stimulate muscle protein synthesis. And if anyone wants to read any of the studies, there's some interesting stuff when they're tracking indicators of that, and it's pretty clear that a powerful, explosive, concentric motion is what creates the biggest stimulus.